Hello and welcome to the Sensibly Speaking podcast. This is Chris Shelton, your host. Thank you very much for inviting me into your home again this week. I'm very happy to be here. We have an interesting show for you today, an interesting interview, and I need to kind of set it up a little bit because there's a lot to know about the Branch Davidians, David Koresh, and the Waco siege. The Waco tragedy is what I will refer to it as, because the entire thing from beginning to end was wholly preventable. None of it needed to happen. From February 28th to April 19th, 1993, for 51 days, there was a siege at the Mount Carmel facility of the Branch Davidians, their main headquarters in Waco, Texas, due to the fact that the group had been reportedly stockpiling weapons, converting semi-automatic weapons to full automatic weapons, importing grenades and explosives and various things, some of which was true, some of which, might have been exaggerated a little bit, but a postal worker and other people had made these reports, and the Bureau of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, the ATF, decided that this was going to be as far as I can tell, decided this was going to be an opportunity to get on the map and make it big and make themselves well known. And they had alerted the media that they were going to be carrying out a raid on the Mount Carmel facility. They could have very easily done a number of other things that would not have been anywhere near as forceful or inflammatory or hostile. But they decided they were going to go about it this way, even after the operation was blown, and they knew that the Branch Davidian compound and all of the people there were aware of the fact that they were coming, and that the whole basis of the raid was that they had serious firepower in that facility and were willing to use it. So from the very get-go, this was just a complete botch. And as a former FBI negotiator who was not on the scene there, he's since gone on to other things and was much more successful than what happened at Waco. But former FBI negotiator Chris Voss has commented that this and the Ruby Ridge disaster were the basis for a complete reformation of how the FBI deals with hostage situations. We haven't necessarily seen something as horribly awful as this. In total, there were 86 people who died. There were 4 ATF agents who died on scene, I think, or were killed pretty straight away in this raid. Again, didn't need to even happen. And following that, there was this 51-day siege. They did manage to negotiate. A bunch of people, some kids, some women, did get out. It wasn't a total loss, but the government operations were fuddled. They were error-ridden. They were clashing with one another between the negotiations team and the more heavy-handed, let's go in there and shoot kind of approach, which was honestly their approach up until this time when afterwards, like I said, a bit of a review of all of this was done. And of course, David Koresh, the leader of this whole thing, was not, I can talk all day long about those problems and issues with the government. On the other hand, and what we're going to talk about today in detail is David Koresh, the leader of this whole thing and the sort of spark that ignited all of this in the first place, because he was not a good man. He, by any metric you care to use, he was a child abuser and rapist. He was a religious fanatic, and he was absolutely the epitome of your fanatical, true believer cult leader. He really was. He checks every box. And so we look at both sides of this and go, the whole thing was just a disaster. And I don't, that's how I look at it, as, from my knowledge and experience with all of this. But finally, I have been contacted by a man named David Bunds, who is my guest today, and he was raised in, or very familiar with, and part of the Branch Davidians and David Koresh, and he got out actually kind of just before this whole disaster happened. So, David, welcome to my show.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, thank you. Miss anything important in that synopsis there, you think?
No, that's a good synopsis. I will say when you say I just got out before it happened, let's call
Yeah,
that 4 years before it happened.
fair enough.
So
Fair
yeah,
enough.
yeah,
Yeah. So
roughly.
let's go ahead and get into, for the audience here, who are you and how are you relevant to all of this? And because you've been talking about this, you have your own YouTube channel. You contributed to a book about Koresh. So where do we start with you?
Well, it starts with my father. Disclaimer, Seventh-day Adventists obviously don't want anything to do with any of this, but unfortunately, Seventh-day Adventists have offshoot groups, and one of them was the Branch Davidians.
Okay.
And so my father ran into them when he was young. So then by the time I was 5 years old, my father's coming back into the group. And so from the age of 5, I was raised a Branch Davidian. Now, in that time, there's no David Koresh. It's Branch Davidian prophets, pretty standard Protestant stuff with a little extra apocalyptic flavor to it. So we're talking about the end of the world and expecting to go to Israel and for any day for the kingdom and things like that. So now,
if I might interrupt you for just a second, could you flesh that out a little bit, just for people who aren't familiar with Protestantism or Seventh-day Advent, or what's the basic?
Very quickly,
yeah,
Seventh-day Adventism is one of these very many American religions that are come out of the 19th century. So Mormonism, Jehovah's Witnesses, Seventh-day Adventism, Christian Science, during that era. So Seventh-day Adventism starts with what's called the Millerite movement. And there's a guy who says, hey, Jesus is coming. Of course, it doesn't work out. There's a disappointment. There's a reorganization. And then people coalesce around a new idea of, oh, Jesus is in heaven doing special stuff. Instead of coming to earth, he's doing things in heaven. And then they form an organization during the Civil War, 1863, and become the Seventh-day Adventist Church.
Okay.
And then from then on, now the interesting thing about the Seventh-day Adventists, which is really important, is they had a prophetess. Her name was Ellen G. White. You can look her up. She's fairly famous amongst religious studies, as far as if you're an Adventist or if you study American religions, you'll probably heard of her. And she is believed to be an inspired prophet of God. She passed away in 1915.
Okay.
And so she was in the church giving her visions and dreams and writing out, testimonies and books. And she's an enormously prolific author.
That's very interesting. Very prolific, huh?
Oh, like there's so much. And so it's like an enormous corpus.
Interesting.
Similar to L. Ron Hubbard. Reading the stuff. Yeah. Which I'm sure you're familiar with. There's Scientology the same way. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
Lots to read.
It makes me think right away. I mean, I know that's just one data point, but it does, and that and the religious fervor make me wonder about temporal lobe epilepsy, but that's kind of a different topic, but I just thought I'd haul that one out for a second. It's thought that L. Ron Hubbard might have suffered from temporal lobe epilepsy, and that might have been the cause of a great deal of his religious fervor.
Yeah, sure. I mean, because Ellen G. White had an accident when she was young. She was struck by a rock and it almost killed her. And then from that point on, when she became like 17, 18, she started having visions.
There we go. There it is.
And dreamed. And so, maybe there's something going on there. Sure. We don't know for sure. Yeah.
It's just an interesting comment, really. That's all. I'm sort of just throwing it out there, but please carry on. So this was the foundation or the formation of Seventh-day Adventists, and then when do Branch Davidian, and what is that, and when does that come into play?
Okay, well, so Branch Davidian is a hyphenated term, so it's history. So first there were the Davidians, and the reason why they're called Davidians is because they believed in a Davidic kingdom. So in other words,
after King David in some fashion,
right? Well, a latter day David.
Okay.
Yeah. So instead of Jesus coming, which is what a lot of Christians typically are looking for, the Davidians are looking for the kingdom. It's very similar to a Jehovah's Witness concept. I don't know if you've ever seen Jehovah's Witness tracts, but they show people living in this very beautiful earthly setting, and everything's green and pretty and wonderful, and it's all just So like a utopia, essentially. So that's what the Davidians are looking for.
Okay, I have a heaven on earth kind of concept.
Yeah. And this is going to be something that happens before Christ even comes. And then the leader of this group, his name was Victor Hadov. He was from Bulgaria. So he immigrated early 20th century. He then became an Adventist. He then, hey, I've got a message. He then gets a following, eventually separates from the church and begins an organization in Waco, Texas. Now, it wasn't located where the fire was. That's a later location, but they were in Waco. They did have a location where they built up an organization from about 1935 to 1960. They printed literature and sent out proselytizing. They proselytized Seventh-day Adventist churches.
Okay.
Would go to the churches and knock on their door and hey, and listen to us. And they sent out literature. They collected. It was a huge effort to get their message out to the Adventist church up until about 1960 when the organization was dissolved intentionally. But there were other organizations that then sprouted up. And so there's still even Davidians today, actually. So those would not be Branch Davidians. That's the important thing to remember.
Got it.
Okay.
All right.
So then the leader that I mentioned, Victor Hadov, he did pass away in 1955. So then there's another guy that comes on the scene. His name was Benjamin Roden. And he was the leader of the Branch Davidians. And the branch thing means it's in the Bible, Zechariah. It is a religious figure in the Bible who is the new name, he's the leader of this new movement coming around. It's if you want to get into the scholarship of the Bible, it has to do with the return from Babylon. We have a Babylonian captivity in the Bible. The Jews go into captivity. Well, they come back, and then there's these scriptures in the Bible that talk about the branch, and he's going to do everything and solve everybody's problem, and he's the big kahuna, and so the branch is a very interesting apocalyptic scriptural reference.
Oh.
The leader of the Branch Davidians taps into that particular scripture and decides to name the organization the Branch.
Okay.
And then tacks on to the previous title. So the full name of the organization was the Branch Davidians Seventh-day Adventists. It's quite a mouthful.
Yeah, I get it. And of course, with our more English understanding of the word branch, I think a lot of people get this concept that there's sort of, some breakaway group from, something like that, right? But that's really not what it means at all, which is why
the idea is a branch growing out of the stump of Jesse. So in other words, you have the family of David in the Bible. There's a scripture and it says that you're going to have this stump, but a new branch is going to grow out to reestablish the Davidic kingdom line.
Okay, and that's
we're going to regrow that lost kingdom.
Got it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's not obvious.
No, it's not. And nobody in the reporting during the time ever went into any of this. They were just getting the people
we can talk a little bit more about this later, but technically David Koresh didn't want his group to be called the Branch Davidians.
Oh.
But it happened by default.
Okay.
Okay.
So we have this Branch Davidian Seventh-day Adventist organization that is kind of sprung up 1950s. This Roden person is running this thing. How does that progress to David Koresh?
Okay, so Benjamin Roden eventually gets a hold of the Davidian property. So in the 50s, they moved to the current location, the location where the fire occurred.
All right, Mount Carmel.
But that originally belonged to the Davidians. So as I said, the Davidians dissolved their association. The wife of the prophet that I mentioned from Bulgaria, Florence Hadov, she's decided, you know what, I'm done. This isn't working. Let's just wrap up shop and sell the assets. The Branch Davidians in 1965 got title to the property, so they set up camp there. And yeah, so then from that point onward, they were based there until the death of Benjamin Roden, who died in 1978. But his wife, Lois Roden, had already herself established herself as a prophetess. So she was there when he died. She was already there saying, hey, I've got also a message from God, and so started teaching, and so that was the environment that David Koresh came into at the time. Vernon Howell was his name. So he comes to the Branch Davidians in 1981 as a student.
Oh, so back up just 1 second. Let me highlight that. So
Okay.
David Koresh was not his actual name.
No, that's a prophetic name.
Okay.
It's a name that he chose based on his Bible teachings.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So Vernon Howell shows up on the property and says, hi.
Right. He's a Seventh-day Adventist who had heard about the Branch Davidians. He had heard about Lois Roden, and so he came interested in the teachings.
Okay.
And so from 1981 onward, he was just a student. And then in 1983, he managed to convince Lois Roden, hey, why don't you let me teach a message? I have something to say. And that's when he began.
Okay, 1983.
So he was about 10 years. From 83 to 93, obviously, the fire.
Yeah.
He had about a 10-year ministry.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay. And what was at this point now, having, understood the backstory here on Seventh-day Adventists and the Branch and the Davidians, what is the gospel at this point? What are these people gathering around? Do we know at this point in let's say arbitrarily 1983 when he starts up, how many folks are we talking about there, and what are they gathering around?
Okay, well, the whole concept, going all the way back to the Adventists, is that since the Adventists have a prophetess, the whole concept is on this idea of new light. Okay, so your standard evangelical Christians, say you're Baptist, you're Methodist, you're Presbyterians, whatever, they've got the Bible, and then you just learn that, and you're set. And you've got your catechisms with your creeds and everything's. But with Seventh-day Adventists and all these other movements I've mentioned, the idea is, well, we have more light, and the light comes through a messenger sent from God, and then they have a message, and then they tell you the message. And if you reject the message, as of course Adventists told this Victor Hodoff guy, hey, no, thank you. We don't want anything to do with your message. And then, oh, well, you're rejecting new light. You're in trouble.
Right.
And that just keeps happening.
Okay.
So just keep following down the line. The Benjamin Roden told the Davidians, David Koresh told you guys, you better listen to me. I've got some new light here, and you better watch out. If you don't accept it, you're going to be in big trouble. So it's not just, so what I'm getting at is, to answer your question, it's to follow the new light and to be up to date. It's kind of like having the latest software patch. You got to be up to date because otherwise you're going to not know the truth, and then you'll be left behind.
Interesting. So this is a sort of rolling, progressing, changing dogma.
It was called progressive truth.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
You have to progress with progressive truth. You better progress with the truth.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. As brought forward by the prophets and prophetesses.
You got to have a prophet because otherwise you don't know what's going on.
And is there any sort of process? Did Koresh have to go through some ritual exercise? Anything?
Well, he had to come into the group and learn the message first, and become fluent in it, so that when he approached Lois Roden, and this is unusual, I mean, because like I said, normally the prophet would die and then you'd get a message, but she was still alive.
Right.
And then I also need to mention something really important. Unfortunate. Well, to just elaborate a little bit here. As I mentioned, the husband had a message that was Benjamin Roden. and his wife had a message, Lois Roden. They had originally expected their son, their eldest son, to have a message. This was set up and expected, and they believed that Benjamin Roden was antitypical David. So in other words, type is the original model in the Bible, and then the antitype is the fulfillment in modern times. That's the idea. You've got, but Benjamin Roden died, and in the Bible, Solomon builds the temple. Well, Solomon was David's son. George was Ben Roden's son. So George was supposed to build the modern temple. And Lois Roden also agreed. Now, the problem with George, unfortunately, is he had a mental illness. In the sense that, Tourette's was part of it, I'm sure. And then also there was some behavioral management issues in terms of anger management and things. Ultimately, he ended up in a psychiatric facility. By 1998, he passed away of a heart attack. But he was an opponent of David Koresh back in the 80s when David Koresh, as Vernon Howell, first came to the group. So they started butting heads into a competition because the son perceived him as a threat, rightly so. And Lois Roden, the mother, eventually kind of adopted David Koresh as a son informally and let him teach.
So she was kind of favoring him
from her point of view later on, though, because I think that she probably regretted it later. But yeah, at the time, she thought this was a good thing to do.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. So I guess from this, there was an implication in one of the documentaries I was watching that Koresh had sexually sort of made his way into her life as well.
That is absolutely true, and the reason I know that I'm a primary source because I was in a meeting in 1984 when she got up in front of the entire congregation and told that story.
Okay.
And right out of the horse's mouth, and at the time she was spilling the beans. David Koresh had his hands in his head like this. What are you doing? Don't, he was very embarrassed.
Really?
He thought that he was screwed. But it worked out for him. I mean, I was young. I was like 18, so I wasn't firing on all cylinders in terms of understanding the world and the way it works. So
sure.
I kind of, if I'd have been older, I'd probably have been like, hey, what's this all about?
Well, yeah, because wasn't there something like a 50-year age difference or something between them?
Right. She was born in 1916 and he was born in 1959. Yeah. So
yeah, wow.
There you go.
Yeah. Okay. Got it.
So if I was to theorize, it was probably some kind of manipulation tactic on his part.
Yeah, I would think so as well.
She was lonely.
Well, yeah, and he wasn't necessarily, his backstory isn't that great either. I mean, there are.
No, it's not great. I've actually spoken to some former girlfriends, and I won't say their names, but yeah, things are bad. Things are horrible in the backstory. Yes.
Right. Was he? There was, again, a report of, him being sexually abused as a child. Was he a sexual abuser himself?
Yeah, and that's a story he told off and on. I don't know details, but like I said, the book covers that.
Yeah.
So you'll find, I think the author was able to talk to a relative of his, an aunt, that gave some information about that. So yeah, unfortunately, there was some history of abuse.
Right. Right.
Suffered.
It's only, I mean, it's relevant clearly to the story we're telling here, Koresh's backstory because of what it led to, but it's also just indicative to me of the fact that hurt people, and that
right.
tends to be the cycle.
Yeah. The hurt, which then causes insecurity and all that.
That's right. And he came out there. I don't know that he showed up in Mount Carmel with the idea that he was going to be a prophet and take things over. I mean, it's certainly,
at the time, the triggering connection point was that he was talking to a family friend, and he was at a point in his life where he felt like he was lost, that he needed guidance. And he said, I need a prophet. And this family friend was like, well, I know a woman who says she's a prophet. And Lois Roden was the person that she knew. So that was the connection. And so when he came, you're right. He initially was a disciple.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And a true believer.
He was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. So that being the case, let's go ahead and, in terms of that kind of setup now, you 18 years old, you're there. How did that happen? What's your story here?
Okay. Well, let's see. Probably the best way to say it is that my father wasn't really the greatest adherent to his own religion, which I suppose is probably typical in families. You're brought up in a religion and you're looking at your parents and you're like, I don't really think dad and mom doing a very good job. So when I was 17, my father started to fall away from his own religion. Now, and my father was we'll just say that he's not a self-analytical person. Okay, so he's not going to sit there and look at his own behavior and try to figure out, how am I affecting my children? He's just bailing out of his religion because he's mad and just wants to forget about it. And he's not talking about it. So I'm 17, I'm watching him and I'm like, he's an apostate because he's already programmed me. I've already been going to the meetings and I've read the material and I'm like, yeah, this is our religion. But I can't tell him that because he's a type A personality, gets angry.
Okay.
But then,
and where was it that you were raised?
I was raised in Southern California.
Okay. All right. So you're not.
But then we had moved to Texas by the time I was 15. So during the time I told you about where David Koresh is joining the group, I was there visiting regularly and did see him there as, like I said, a normal student member of the group. And I didn't know him well, but I did see him and talk to him occasionally.
And what were your impressions of him as an individual, as a person?
He was distraught. There was a meeting where he got up and was crying and talking about what a sinner he was. And that was unusual in our group. We were very, we sit in the pews and sit still and listen. We didn't cry and carry on. So it was unusual for someone to get up and start talking about what a sinner they were and how they were crying and they were lost. And my dad at the time didn't like it. And later on when we were driving home, he said, that guy sounds like he's going to have a message of his own one day, which was true.
Yeah. How prophetic of your father there.
Yeah, but he didn't mean it as a compliment, obviously.
Yeah, no, I get that.
So anyway, when David Koresh, as I said, approached Lois Roden, and he's given the green light to begin teaching, he eventually starts contacting people because we had already moved back to California. So all of a sudden we're getting letters and we're getting phone calls and we're being told about this new message. Now I'm like, well, hey, if there's a new message, maybe it'll solve our problems. My father doesn't want to hear about it because the thing that had happened, which is really important, which, buildings burn down all the time, but our administration building had burned down. And that had all the printing equipment and tapes and tracks and everything was there. So we lost enormous amount of valuable material and equipment. And in our way of thinking, if our organizational ability to do things is destroyed, then we're thinking, well, God must be mad at us. It was a common belief in the group. And David Koresh was like, that's right. God is mad at us. And that was part of his message. And he explained why the building burned down and was telling us that, because of this and that. And I wanted to hear that because unfortunately, Lois Roden was not necessarily interested in dealing with that very well. I think she just wanted to move on and not talk about the negative things about the building burning down. So there was a combination of things going on at the time that kind of fed into fortuitously giving him an advantage in terms of starting a message.
Got it. Let me ask you, when you were there and then you moved back out to California and then I guess you made your way back out there for this new message, but during that time, under Roden's leadership, was there a doomsday gun piling, gun stockpiling?
No, there was never any guns.
Okay, so
we didn't have guns on purpose. Because we didn't need guns, because God is protecting us. Why would you need a gun?
Right.
Victor Hoddeth, the original guy, didn't have guns on purpose. He's even taught, one of his teachings was, yeah, we don't have guns here. God is our fortress and protector. Right. That's why the guns thing is so weird, because in fact, I didn't like it myself, but I kind of left right when it was happening. So I wasn't involved with guns.
Got it.
But yeah, we never had a history of guns, but the person who did first bring guns was George Roden, the son.
Right, because there was a shootout of stuff.
He was a rival.
Yeah.
So I think David Koresh was like, well, if he's going to have guns, and I need to get some guns too. I think that's probably what it was.
And this, of course, is all happening in Texas, where it's pretty easy to get guns.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. That's right.
Because there was a shootout between those two at some point.
That's right. That's another interesting story.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so the property is valuable.
Mm-hmm.
David Koresh, as Vernon Howell, was exiled in 1984, and he was gone for 4 years.
What was he exiled for?
Well, he left because George was getting ready to, I think, probably wanted to shoot him.
Okay, David
Koresh left voluntarily because I think he could see that if he didn't get out of there, there was gonna be a problem.
Okay.
So he left, and he never returned, except for, like you just mentioned, there was a situation, and like I said, George was mentally ill.
Mm-hmm.
So this sounds crazy, but it's true. George Roden had dug up a woman out of the cemetery that we had on the property, and there had been a woman who had passed away many years previously, and he put her casket in the church, and then he called David Koresh and said, "Hey, resurrection contest time."
Oh my
God. David Koresh is not insane. And he was like, no. But then, ding, corpse abuse laws. If I could get a photograph, if I could get some evidence, maybe I could get George in trouble. By the way, his mother had already passed away, so she's gone.
Mm-hmm.
So he's actually in any of this.
So at this point, during this little window of time where Koresh
1987.
87. This guy is running the operation.
He's running the operation, but because of his mental illness, there's followers leaving right and left, and he's mostly by himself, and then having to have rando people come in to just rent some land and live, and they're not really a religious element.
Okay, so the whole thing had kind of fallen apart under him.
It is, yeah. Because he, and it's sad. It's sad. He's mentally ill. It's very sad.
Right. Yeah. So at this point, then, just kind of putting two and two together on our narrative so far, Koresh has not yet come forward with revelations or a new light, and this is not yet the point where you're coming back out there. This is he goes off for 4 years, and George ruins the whole thing, and then
David Koresh has a message.
Yeah.
But yeah, if you say new light, I don't know if you're referring to a very specific point in history in our group where there was some special new light that came. That's 1989.
Well, I think so, because and I'm trying not to make a jumble of it here. I'm trying to.
Yeah, so you're right. At this point, he's just trying to get the property back.
Okay.
So he can have Mount Carmel as a base of operations.
Got it. Okay.
So as you said, there was an attempt to get evidence. There was a shootout. There were no fatalities, but there was apprehensions and arrests and a trial, which the ultimate result of the trial was an acquittal.
Yep.
For the men involved, and including David Koresh.
That's right.
And then George himself got himself in trouble with the judge at some point and was declared in contempt of court and taken into custody. And essentially the property was vacant except for the aforementioned rando people who have nothing to do with Branch Davidian teachings. David Koresh picks up his whole group, which is almost 100 people, and they just barge right in. Hey, we're taking over. That was 1988, and that's when they got Mount Carmel back and set up shop. And
so that's sort of the real kind of beginning of David Koresh's ministry in Mount Carmel, like as a thing.
That's in Mount Carmel. That's right.
Okay.
He had been ministering various places, but yeah.
Okay. I was not aware of that 4-year gap in there and where he had taken off and come back. So very interesting in putting all of these together.
Now, to be clear, though, during that time, that 4-year time, he's developing theologies and doctrines and teachings and all that stuff. But he's a very orally oriented person. So he doesn't write a lot. He speaks and makes tapes sometimes. Yeah.
Okay. And is this how you are hearing about him?
Yeah, like I'm getting tapes and when I'm younger and listening to his message on tape, or I'm there in person listening to him. Yeah.
Okay. And what were as a young, impressionable young man, and you were obviously raised with this whole dogma and you were a true believer. How much of a true believer? I mean, how hardcore were you about this stuff at that time?
You know, my problem is I think too much.
Okay.
Because I'm a science-oriented person, and I always have been. So, like, I like astronomy, and I even had a real telescope growing up, like a honest-to-goodness one, reflector, really expensive. And I knew a lot about science and stuff. So, but then I also had the religious aspect, which, and it was fine. It worked out okay. But Koresh was uneducated. And then in addition to being uneducated, which is not necessarily anything wrong with that, but also very stubborn and very opinionated, which I think, cult leaders tend to be that way. They tend to be my way or the highway. And, so all of those types of personality traits that you might expect were definitely present. And so if I would hear something and I'd be like, well, that doesn't sound right to me, I would raise my hand, like, hey, wait a minute. In fact, one time I did that with Lois Roden in the room because David Koresh was teaching and she was there and he was trying to impress her with how unified we all were and how she needed to get with the program. And I raised my hand and said, I think you're wrong about that, Vernon. And he was like, you shut up.
you shut up.
So, but on the other hand, it's kind of like a double-mindedness. I'm like, also, well, but he's still a prophet. And yeah, so
okay,
I'm
so
going
somehow,
back and forth.
Well, a little bit. And I'm wondering, was this just a reflection of the cognitive dissonance you were experiencing?
Yeah, exactly. It's cognitive dissonance. I obviously didn't know what that was. I didn't know any.
Sure.
I didn't know what critical thinking was. I didn't know any of that stuff.
Yeah,
I'm just thinking to myself about things like, that doesn't really sound right, because I have a certain epistemology in my head that I had developed growing up that never really completely went away. And it was very different from Koresh's, obviously. His own way of thinking about things and the way things is basically he believed that God spoke to him directly. In fact, I think, based on my own experience with him, that he was probably a schizophrenic. And it would be auditory hallucination.
Yeah.
Auditory hallucinators, schizophrenics, then have to filter that through their belief system. And in Koresh's case, it's God talking. Some other people might think it's aliens or whatever, but Koresh thought it was God. And so for example, to give an example, a historical occurrence during the siege was there was originally an entire plan to everybody to give up.
Yeah, early on.
They had broadcast. The deal was, hey, put my tape on the air, and I'll come out.
Yep.
But then it didn't happen, and it eventually came out. Well, God told David Koresh no. Well, I really do believe that a voice did come in his head and told him no.
Sure.
But I, of course, think that it was a neurodivergent issue.
Of course. And yeah, that's apparent in his speech manner. Everything about him is very clear that he, excuse me, is not just some L. Ron Hubbard con man. He is all in on this.
Interesting you should say that, because some of the negotiators came to a different conclusion. They thought that he was a con man.
I'm sure they did. That would have been one of their many laundry list of mistakes that they made on site.
Absolutely.
In dealing with him. They made so many.
With you. One of them in particular, I was reading something the other day and I was like, oh man, based on this guy, this negotiator just draws some conclusions based on talking to him over a number of days and having this very narrow experience. And it's not really very professional, in my opinion.
No, their whole tactic, and I read up on this a little bit, their whole approach as hostage negotiators was very problem solving oriented and very unemotional. And it's like, okay, here's the problem, here's the solution. And they were wholly unprepared with their doctrine and protocols to deal with a cult leader, a true believer, an extremist.
I will say, one thing, there's a Waco miniseries.
Mm-hmm.
Now that miniseries, let's not get too let's not say that it's too historically accurate,
mm-hmm.
but there's a main character in the miniseries who's a negotiator. And he was one of the negotiators who was more against the kind of thing you're saying. He thought that they should be doing it differently.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So there was, like you said, there was some disagreement.
Oh, absolutely. The only people on site during that siege who I thought were even trying to resolve it in a sensible way were the negotiators.
Yeah.
But interesting, though, because their main opponent and rival for control of the situation was the FBI hostage rescue team. And they were going there guns blazing, and they kept screwing things up for the negotiators.
The whole idea of needing a hostage rescue team is problematic.
In that situation, it sure was.
Based on what I know, because I had been a member for many years, I really don't think there were any hostages, to be honest.
Yeah, it wasn't that kind of a situation.
There were children.
Yes. But they in their way of thinking, they couldn't think beyond the bounds of how they understood these situations to be.
Right.
And that was their systematic error in dealing with this, One of the ways they would justify this hostage belief is they would see members holding up their children to the windows. Right? Mm-hmm.
And so one way of looking at that is, oh my God, they're showing us the hostage children. But of course, it's just parents showing their kids, look, see all those bad people out there trying to kill us?
Exactly.
Remember how we had studies and David Koresh told us about this? That's right. Actually what's going on.
Exactly. And then there were other very aggressive and hostile actions they took.
Yeah, exactly. You're right. They're destroying property. They're being disrespectful. Yeah, it's crazy.
It was nuts. It was nuts.
Yeah, it was like you said, the negotiators on one side, the hostage rescue team on the other, and they're butting heads and they're not even communicating very well. And it's a mess.
That's right. That's right. And the whole thing sparked off by, guns a-blazing ATF agents who were more interested in TV time than they were in actually dealing with the situation effectively. None of those people who were there, every one of them were in over their heads. None of those people had a clue what they were doing, and they were just winging it.
That's right. They actually, the agents were trained over maybe 3 or 4 days on that specific operation. But other than that, they didn't know what was,
no. Was, and they even, and the thing that actually, just to critique the whole government response on this for a second, I know we're jumping ahead, but since we're on this, is, they had a guy on the inside.
That's right.
And they didn't even use him before the raid to what's going on in there? How many people? How are we dealing? Nothing. Right. It was such a botched operation at every level. Every time they could screw it up, they did.
And also David Koresh knew that he was probably a government agent. I think that it was pretty transparent.
Yeah.
Because the house that the agents were living in was across the street from the front entrance of Mount Carmel.
Mm-hmm. And
I remember reading this somewhere. They said they were college students, but the Branch Davidians weren't idiots.
Right, exactly.
And when they would interact with these college students, they just weren't giving out the college student vibe.
Exactly.
You know what I mean?
So
they put two and two together, and then one of these guys is coming over for studies, but David Koresh was always very polite to him, and just basically taught him the message like he would any other follower.
Right.
And he could go and come and you're right. Once he found out, oh my God, I got to go tell the commanders that he knows that they're, yeah.
That's right. But it was too late. They were already barging in.
Yeah.
Okay, let's back up a second here. I wanted to ask you a little bit more about Koresh's ministry prior to the whole awfulness. What was he pushing now? Because we have this 4-year period of him running around with this 100-man congregation or thereabouts, and you're in and out of this in terms of listening to him, talking on tapes, or you go out there and listen to him. What's the message now versus what it was under the Rodens?
Right. So basically what David Koresh is doing is he is teaching that he is the ultimate savior of the world.
He is personally.
Yeah. And the way that works is his message is the 7 seals of Revelation. So long story short, Revelation has a book, there's seals, the seals are loosed. And then as the seals are loosed, you read what's happening in Revelation, end of the world stuff. He was the one in the book. There's a supernatural being that is the one that looses the seals, and that is the Lamb of God as a character there. Okay. So for David Koresh, the key to loosing the seals is to be able to open the Bible and decode it and say, okay, see this scripture here? Well, that connects with that. And that goes on for hours and days and weeks, however long you want to listen to studies, right? And his idea is, I'm showing you the book. The book is the Bible. And that's the Bible is the source of the secrets to the prophecies. And the prophecies are what you have to know if you want to survive in the last days. So these people that are students there listening to him, that's what they wanted to be called. They wanted to be called the students of the 7 seals.
Oh, okay.
Unfortunately, I think that's too much of a mouthful for the media to catch on to. But that's what they were. They were the students of the 7 seals.
Okay.
And David Koresh was the teacher, and he was teaching them the 7 seals. To flash forward a little bit, the final end negotiating tactic was David Koresh was going to write out his 7 seals, which he was in the process of doing, but then the FBI became impatient and he never finished that process.
Right.
The reason that's interesting is because I remember I mentioned he was an orally teaching person. Mm-hmm. For him to write out anything is actually very unusual for him. He never wrote anything out hardly. So that would have been like a breakthrough. Maybe he would have come out if he had finished his seals. Well, I don't know, but it's possible.
It's possible. There was so
that's his message. 7 seals, savior of the world. I'm the guy that can teach you. Nobody else can. You got to listen to me. And in fact, during the negotiation process, that's a constant theme. Mm-hmm. Can you show me the seals? Can you show me the seals? No, you can't. Only, if you just show me the seals, then I'll give up right now, but they can't do it.
But they can't do it. Yeah. And now, okay, so this is kind of the core of his new light or his revelation.
The core. And then it involves polygamy. And it also involves, unfortunately, the nullification of marriages. Mm-hmm. And then he is now essentially considered married to all the women in the group.
And let's not sugarcoat this because that included all of the girls.
It's young girls, as young as 12 in some cases.
That's right.
And there's there's a statutory rape essentially.
Yeah.
It's bad.
It's really bad. And there were some believers who couldn't follow along with that. There were some women who left. There were some people who left when this came out as the new thing. Right. Yeah.
Yeah. When this new light came, which that was a component of it, the giving up of marriage, there were a lot of people from Australia who broke away. And one of them was Mark Bro. He was a person that came into the group from Loma Linda University in 1986. He was really a big deal in the group. But when the new light came, he saw that it was false doctrine, eventually broke away, went to Australia. Some other people broke away. And so there was a schism in the group, really. Yeah. I was part of that schism myself. I finally
Is that
got
what
connected
caused?
up with
Is that what
Mark
caused
Rowe,
you
and he
to?
told. Hmm?
Is that what caused you to break away? Was that revelation?
Right. I had been kicked out of the group. I have a whole video on why, because it's complicated, but essentially I didn't fit in with David Koresh's plans,
Okay.
and so he had to kick me out. But I didn't figure any of that out till years later. But then, while I was out of the group, I was still in there in my head.
Right.
And then eventually got in touch with the guy that I mentioned, Mark Bro, and then he was able to show me some things, and then that's when I started my deprogramming
Got it.
process.
Okay, got it. I wonder if he never forgave you for speaking out of turn to him about how wrong he was.
Yeah, well, I mean, that was, yeah, I was a problem to him. Yeah, sure. Because from his point of view, it's, oh, David, he's so deceived, and oh boy, I hope I can straighten him out someday,
Yeah, exactly. Okay, so these revelations are new, and then this is sort of causing its own level of friction, because now at this point, you had said that there weren't guns or any of that kind of stuff involved until after you left. Did that start like shortly
the
after?
guns were just starting while I was in my last few months there. So in other words, he was just beginning to purchase automatic, not automatic, but semi-automatic weaponry, rifles and things. But I wasn't involved with any of that, but I had heard about it. And
sure. What was the reasoning there? Because I'm kind of wondering. I'm trying to figure out as we're going along here, and I'm quite sure that there are innumerable inconsistencies and contradictions all throughout his oral doctrine. But what was the reasoning for taking this from no, we don't need any guns, we got God on our side, to, oh no, we got to arm up because things are going to get bad, and that's the only way we're going to survive? Where did that whole line come from?
Yeah, that's a hard question for me to answer.
Okay.
Like I said, one thing I mentioned was that George had guns, but then George was gone.
Right.
So, and then even when George was around, the gun level was very low. So then this enormous stockpiling.
Yeah.
Which I'm sure you've seen some of the numbers. It's millions of rounds of ammunition, and
I mean, they really went to town on the guns. That's why I'm so curious about it, because it was not just 1 or 2 or 5 or 10.
Right.
They had 50 caliber
rifles.
Right. They had grenades. They had lots and lots of bullets.
Right.
I mean, wow. It was like extraordinary how much they had stockpiled in such a short time.
So let me give my own theory.
Yeah, tell me.
For a long time, David Koresh and the Branch Davidians in general, and this is a belief that went way back to the original Branch Davidians of 1955, we believed that we would eventually be going to Israel, to the land of Israel, to then participate in the setting up of a kingdom there. However, during the schism that I mentioned, individuals contacted the Israelis, whatever over there that you contact, to warn them about problem groups. I guess the consulate, maybe, I don't know. Somebody was contacted in Israel on some official government channel. And we warned them, not me personally, but as a group, we ex-members warned them, hey, these people by this name, and they've got polygamy, and this guy's got, we gave them the lowdown. And they were like, well, thank you very much. And we'll put them on the list of forbidden groups to come over here. And all of a sudden, David Koresh finds out he can't go to Israel. So that's step one.
Okay.
Step two is now everything that was supposed to happen in Israel, I guess it's going to happen here at Mount Carmel.
Yeah, that's right.
And so, hey, let's set up camp here at Mount Carmel, and let's get guns, and let's just dig in. And because it wasn't just guns, right? They had meals ready to eat. They had all kinds of equipment and facilities to obviously to last quite a while in a siege situation. They were prepared.
Yeah, they really they were
ready. They had weapons. They had facilities. They had meals. Whatever they were expecting it.
Yeah,
and you could say it's a self-fulfilling prophecy, but nevertheless, that's what. Because okay, so here's the one thing.
Mm-hmm.
In the Bible, there's this really super scary nation that likes to kill everybody, including the Israelites, and that's the Assyrians. Mm-hmm. And the Assyrians anciently were pretty scary superpower, and they're a real historical thing. You can learn about them, and they used to just besiege cities and kill everybody and stab them and put hooks through the survivor's mouth, and lead them on a chain and take them off into exile. And
damn.
Well, so our group, the Branch Davidians, we believe that the United States was the modern day equivalent to the government. The government of the United States was the modern day equivalent to the super scary, ancient, cruel Assyrians that like to kill the God's people.
Now, was this a pre-Koresh belief?
Yes.
Okay. Yes. So it was always us versus them against the government. But
the key thing, in the pre-Koresh days, the way that we defeated the Assyrian was spiritually.
Right.
We would get right with God and stop sinning and make sure that you obey the scriptures and do everything, make sure you cross your T's and dot your I's and but Vernon trying to transition, David Koresh transitioned into, well, we're going to need guns.
Right.
to shoot at the Assyrian.
Because they're going to come.
Key thing. It's a major shift in theological emphasis.
Major. Yeah, very major. Okay, so that's kind of how that shift happened, and it happened during that time period. And then he convinces these people all to get on board, and now we're stockpiling guns. Do you happen to know from your research, because I know you weren't there on site anymore, where did they get the money to do all this? I mean, it's not like I can just start stockpiling.
There were individuals who were employed, and they would... It's not a portion of your money. It's pretty much your whole paycheck goes right into Koresh's safe.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, and there were some individuals who had come into the group who had financial resources. So it wasn't millions upon millions of dollars, but we are talking about several hundreds of thousands of dollars of financial resources available to purchase these things. Yes.
Okay, got it. All right. So basically, it came in from the members and from their work. And they weren't out selling trinkets. This is big money stuff. They were engaging in here.
And I think also there was some business dealings in gun shows itself. I don't know much about that part of it, but I do know they were going to gun shows, buying and selling, and maybe there was some profiteering there. Very well, could have been.
No, I think you're absolutely right, because they were huge on getting guns from gun shows. That was a major source of their stockpile.
Now, 95% legal stuff going on, but my father, who was there at the property up until the ATF showed up, he just happened to be driving off somewhere to do some errands.
Your father was there?
My father was living there at the time, but when he was coming home, he ran into the ATF on the road, and they knew who he was because he was one of the members.
Yeah.
And they took him into custody. He was ultimately not charged with anything, and they eventually released him. So he wasn't involved in the shootout. But he told me, because he was an engineering machinist guy, and he told me that they were working on converting semi to fully automatic weapons.
Right.
But he said that it is very labor intensive and very difficult and time consuming, and they didn't get very much done.
Okay, but
that was his own words to me. So trying to, wanting to, but not getting very far with it.
Okay, because that was one of the claims, and apparently semi-legit.
Yeah, there was at least a few. Yeah. There must have been a few that were fully automatic, but I don't think that every single man in the group had a fully automatic weapon, if I was to guess.
No, and that was never claimed to be the case, but it was one of the reasons why the ATF was going in there in the first place.
That's right. they were going in on suspicion of illegal conversions and things like that.
That's right. There was also a neighbor who reported hearing, what they thought was a 50 caliber rifle, which is true that they did have one of those.
Yeah.
So it wasn't that all of it was a pretext. It's just the way they went about it was so ham-fisted that they, and Koresh kept calling him on it too. It wasn't like he was a dumb guy. From day one, he was like, "You guys could have picked me up in town, you morons! Like, what are you doing?"
They could have got him. Sure,
and they could have.
I think it's like you say. I think they wanted to.
It was ambition.
Well, there was a TV movie made back in '93, right after the raid, and the theory in that movie was the ATF was having budgetary problems. So the theory was, maybe they needed to make a big splash. I don't know if this is true, but it's the idea of, hey, we got to get in the newspapers, I guess. I don't know.
It seems to be a logical conclusion based on the facts that there was some underlying motivation that demanded on the part of the ATF command that this be a big splashy media thing, even to the point of inviting the media there. And again, every level where you could make a mistake, because how were the Branch Davidians tipped off? By that media they invited, asking
that is right. In fact, the gentleman who tipped off the media, or was tipped off by the media, which was a postal worker, was my wife's sister. So my sister-in-law's husband.
Wow.
Yeah, David Jones.
Okay.
David Jones was a postal worker. He was on his route.
Yep.
And some reporters, "Hey, buddy, can you tell us where the raid's going to be?" Oh, yeah. He's like, "I got to go tell David,
Exactly. I mean, it was just
exactly what happened.
Just such a comedy of errors.
Yeah, it was. It's crazy.
Oh, it was absolutely nuts. Like every level screwed this up somehow.
Yeah.
And this is all pre-internet days. We take so much for granted now that just didn't have that.
There's no internet.
There's no cell phones. There's no Google. There's no Google Maps. There's no, if you needed directions, you ask somebody. And a postal worker.
And this is the boonies.
Yeah. This is way out.
Literally.
Yeah.
This is out in the middle of nowhere.
Yeah. So, it's not like there's a lot of people to ask. It's not like there's a lot of maps.
No,
this is back in the days
country. There's nothing out there.
Yeah, it's Thomas Guide maps. I mean, that's what you had, So, it's all understandable. It's just also bloody stupid at the same time, Okay, so getting back to Koresh here. So, because I'm just fascinated by the guy, obviously, and his psychology, which was, he was not well educated, and yet he was calculating, he was clever, he was able to put two and two together. He was not insane that way, but his beliefs and his ego were in overdrive.
Yes.
Like all the time.
Yeah.
And it just never really came down from that. And he gathered this small, relatively small group of people around him, but tragically, most of them ended up giving up their lives for this. And we're not going to debate the conspiracy stuff of all of this. It was very clear there were cover-ups on the government's part. I don't think that's even debatable. But there was also a great deal of egregious behavior on the part of this group, and they did need to be stopped. What they were doing was gross and illegal. So it's not like there's any side that's really got the white hat on with this one, But with Koresh, what was your thinking in terms of what got you to go, okay, I got to get out of here. This is not working out.
Okay, well, like I said, I was kicked out initially.
Yeah, but then you came back.
So then I kind of spent a year in limbo.
Mm-hmm.
But while I was gone, the new light happened, which was, like I said, it's a major shift in teachings. And I was married, and there were a few people in the group who were married. One of the people was Stephen Schneider. He was the lieutenant.
Yep.
So Judy and Steve were a married couple. The the first clue I heard about this was I used to go visit my mother at the local hospital. She was a registered nurse working there, and she also lived at the compound at the time. She was a member. She got out later, so she wasn't around during the fire either.
Good.
Neither was my sister. But she said, "Oh, we've got new light, and people like Steve Schneider and Mark Bro are having trouble." I'm like, "What? Why would they be having trouble?" And she wouldn't tell me, but my wife, actually, who's smarter than me, said, I think he took all the women now. I was like, nah. Anyway, eventually I did
nailed
find out. Yeah, eventually I did find out because I was sent a tape by one of the ex-members, Mark Bro, and he explained some things to me. And because he was living in Australia, it was very difficult to communicate. It's expensive. I did get a letter and a tape. And then I was able to start thinking for the first time in a long time. So I started thinking about things, and I just started reading and studying and thinking and trying to process. And I can actually and I'm sure you've had a similar experience. You know, you're a Scientologist and you're in that, and then you go through a process, and then you're not in that anymore. And so your brain is just like, whoa, you're just like going through all of these realizations, and you know, you're reorienting your thinking, and you're reevaluating the way you know things. And it's just a whole thing that I was going through. And plus I was going back and studying the original writings of the previous prophets. That's another thing. Because like I said, if we're progressing truth, we got a truth and then more truth and more truth. I was like, well, but what about that truth back there? That actually seemed a little shaky. So I think we got some shaky foundations here.
There you go. Yeah.
So I was like, because the same thing in Scientology, I'm sure there's similar problems with this stuff back here. Maybe it's not so solid. And you start thinking about the chinks in the armor, and the chains of the links are not quite so strong. And it's like, uh-oh, I've got some issues here. That's basically what happened.
Got it. And so basically it started unraveling for you.
Yeah, it unraveled. Yeah, it unraveled. All the neat little stories and narratives that had been carefully crafted, where I started peeling back the layers, and
Right.
Yeah.
Well, I have to say, it's certainly fortunate that, you know, your family got out of there literally in the nick of time. I mean, wow.
Yes.
You know?
Yes. Yeah. I didn't lose any family members, which is good for me, but bad for a lot of people who, like I said, my sister-in-law's husband was David Jones, but unfortunately he perished, I think on the first day. He was one of the ones who was shot.
Okay, yeah, because some of them were shot as well.
Now he was obviously at the compound. Now his wife, my sister-in-law, she had already left because of disagreement, so it's not like they were together. But it was still very tragic for her. And then of course her children had lost their father. So
right. Okay, I guess I want to ask you now. I mean, having kind of covered the main points of your narrative with this, are there any other, you know, crucial or important points to your story or to Koresh's, you know, new light that we have not touched on that we might want to make sure we get in here?
Well, let's see. I guess so one thing I could try to explain is if we look at the membership profile, there were a lot of people who had come in from the Adventist Church, and especially there's a particular location in the UK. We had a lot of they had a lot of recent members from a particular location in Great Britain. Who had come in from the Adventist Church over there. And the thing that made them vulnerable was this hook that Koresh would use, where he would emphasize their belief in Ellen G. White, the spirit of prophecy. So unlike a normal or a conventional Protestant believer, it's just the Bible and that's it. There's no modern prophets. But Adventists believe in a modern prophet, at least one.
Mm-hmm.
And so a lot of these people would be like, well, if we have one, why can't we have more than one?
Mm-hmm.
And the Adventists don't really have a good answer for that. See, that's the thing. That's the weakness in Adventist theology. They can say, well, we just have the one, and that's just the way it is. But it's not, it's not obvious. I mean,
Right.
maybe you could have more than one, right? In fact, they technically would say, well, sure, there could be another one, maybe, but we don't know of any so far. But yeah, obviously, if David Koresh comes on the scene and says, hey, I've got a message and I'm a prophet, and then the other thing they do is when Adventists recruit, they do sometimes it's called a revelation seminar. At least it used to be. So they would put up a sign out of a church and it would say revelation seminar, and you would go in and they would take you through the cool parts of the Bible, the Revelation and the Daniel and the prophecies, and there's beasts and there's all kinds of crazy fire and brimstone. And some people kind of are interested in that, In other words, we're not going through the dry parts with the gospel and the Jesus stories. Maybe that's for later. We're going to go look at all the cool stuff.
Right.
And people come in, and then that's a revelation seminar. And then as David Koresh himself complained one time, well, then I got into the church, and then all of a sudden nobody cared about Revelation anymore. And he was like, well, wait a minute, that's the greatest book in the Bible. And then, so he would just continue on and say, hey, you want to learn more about Revelation? And they would go, yeah. And they come in. And so that's why they were not everybody, but obviously, in fact, the profile was they were recent converts, typically. So in other words, it wasn't Adventists that had been raised Adventists and their families were Adventists, and going back, it was always fairly new Adventists that had recently been pulled in, told this story about our prophet and the revelation, and then they're just continuing on in their minds with this project of learning more about prophets and revelations. And yeah, that's what they're thinking. So that's why they were vulnerable.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense with what I saw and heard. I've heard a couple survivor accounts, and they definitely have first gen energy. In other words, that's sort of like recent, that convert energy, right?
That's right. They have first gen energy. I like that.
Yeah, that's how I would put that. And because one woman who had a child, and it was actually, she got out and her child got out, because her, finally, once the child was released, her, mother instincts kind of came into kicking into gear, because up until then she self-described as, I'm not this is not, I didn't think of myself as a human being or a mother or a wife. I was a soldier of God. I was, that was the role we had. And it was and when you get that kind of identification going on, which is what I mean by that first gen energy, that kind of like, really intense, passionate belief. Yeah. It's hard to break people away from that. That is the kind of extremist mindset, I will call, where the family ties and the social ties are really secondary. They really take a back seat to the revelation. And that's why. In fact,
I'll tell you a story.
Yeah.
During the period I described where I was out of the group, but in limbo and I hadn't fully deconverted, I had some pictures taken of my family, just regular studio photographs of your family, and everybody looks really nice. And I sent some to my mom, and she called me up later, and she was crying, telling me, I can't keep the pictures, David. I have to send them back. And I thought it was weird. I found out later, well, it's because, as you just said, David Koresh was severing family ties. He was telling people, get rid of the pictures of your family, get rid of, I'm your family. Exactly. That's what was going on. And this is one of the things that was becoming more extreme. He hadn't done that before. This was new.
Right. Exactly. This is, I want to use that to stress a point here. I'm asked often, and it's always different. Each cult leader has their own backstory, has their own context, but often I believe my own thinking on this is that they figure this stuff out on their own. They don't have to go read about L. Ron Hubbard or Jim Jones to figure out how you manage and control a
It's
group
very
of people.
intuitive.
It is. Because
They
it's a
know,
mindset.
hey, if you've got family and you got to get that out of there.
That's right. That's right. That whole disconnection, shunning practice comes into play right away because they find that these followers are easily distracted from the message or the purpose or the cause by these ties, by these
Another
social,
story.
you know? And they don't want any of that. So they got to cut that off.
Stephen Schneider.
Yeah.
I spoke to his sister the other day just to catch up. I had been speaking to her during the crisis, and then I talked to her recently just to reminisce. He was from Wisconsin. He had went to go visit family, let's just say a year previous to the fire. And he has parents. He's from an Adventist family. So he's obviously on the outs with his parents because they're Adventists. He's not. He's now progressed. And anyway, when he goes and visits them, they're telling him David Koresh is a bad guy. And he's like, oh, no, But then he goes and visits his sister. And she told me just recently, she said she had studied cults. She had studied how you deal with people. And she said she knew, don't criticize the leader. Don't attack.
Yep.
Just be family.
Yeah.
And she fed and she sat down and they would talk and they would have meals. And he began to deprogram.
That's right.
He began to tell her things. One of the tragic things he told her, unfortunately, he did go back to Koresh. But one of the things Steve Schneider told her, I wish I had never met David Koresh.
Oh my God.
Destroyed my life.
Oh.
But he felt like he owed the people something. I had gone in it this far. I've made a commitment. The people are back there, including his own ex-wife, I suppose. Still legally married, really. And there's still all that. But yeah. Wow. So you're right. The family tie is what's getting to him.
That's right. And they barely utilized that. Really, they were so wrapped up in the kids on site during the siege that they sort of were able to play on some of those heartstrings, but they totally missed the forest for the trees with that, because they could have gotten so many more people out if they had even understood that much of the psychology of the situation. The last thing I have to ask about is if from what all the things you said, I'm trying to put two and two together, and I'm having a little difficulty with this last bit. Okay. And so, because I really feel like I got a pretty good grip on the situation, and I hope the audience has a better grip on it now as a result of our conversation today. I really do. That's the whole point of this. And I'm wondering, though, about, okay, so you've got this new light, this new messaging, and it involves building on a foundation of heaven on earth. We're going to have a new earth, new world here, right? And the guns and all of the stockpiling and everything, I guess, was to fight off the forces of evil or Satan or whatever, should that day come where we're going to have to fight for our right to be in the new, revealed world. But why would that then lead to a mindset on David Koresh's part of, I'm not afraid to die? Because he said those words to the negotiators and they totally missed it. They totally missed the significance of that, I think, right? When he said, I'm not afraid to die. You guys don't get me, or you don't get what we're doing here. How does that enter into this picture? Could you explain that to me?
Are you asking me how he developed that attitude?
Yeah. Because it seems like if you want to be around for the revelation, everything, that you would be afraid to die. So how does that work?
There had always been a doctrine that he would die. Originally, like I mentioned, the group was supposed to go to Israel,
right,
the Holy Land.
Right.
So during that journey to the Holy Land, he was supposed to become like a modern Jesus over there and start preaching in the Holy Land and making a big thing over
Sure.
there, and they
Sure.
were going to actually crucify him.
Oh, that's what he saw in his future.
Yeah, no, it's true.
Oh, that makes
Yeah.
everything makes sense now.
Yeah, he was supposed to
Oh,
die. They were
got
supposed to
it.
kill him because one of the reasons, in fact, I was just listening to him say this on a tape today because I was doing some research. He was saying, well, I'm a polygamist and they're going to hate that and they're going to kill me because they don't like polygamy. That would want for one reason. They were basically going to kill him because this guy thinks he knows the Bible and he's evil but really it was going to be like a Jesus situation. Forgive them, Father, and they know what they do. And it was a whole thing. It was a whole thing. It was a whole developed story and narrative that was all crushed when they couldn't go to Israel. They had to stay in America, and so that's when they transitioned to Mount Carmel. But the death wish was still there. And I think that in his mind, I don't think he thought he could move forward until he died. The death was necessary for the glorification and the transition into his new supernatural form.
Right.
Yeah.
And that is where we find a connection with Heaven's Gate.
Right.
And Jim Jones and that.
Yeah, it's this right. Death is the gateway.
Yeah.
To the
That's where it
I mean,
goes.
the Heaven's Gate people literally bags over the head, lay down, put the shoes on, everything. Oh man, it's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was ritualistic suicide in the case of Heaven's Gate. Here with Waco, it was suicide by FBI, right? But it was still
right. I think during the siege, there was very often a sincere desire that's, hey, God, at any minute now, God's going to come down and, and it's going to destroy whatever. Something, they're waiting for something to happen.
Right.
And so when the tanks started attacking on the last day and the gas, and like, all right, this is it, and
it's interesting because it also informs why Koresh would have a vision of, oh no, God said no, we can't leave on day. What was that, day or two or three, where they were lined up, they were going to go. It was going to be a done deal, and then he at the last minute he pulled the plug.
And then I just thought of something else.
Yeah.
And this is a personality trait of David Koresh. In the trial that they had from the previous shootout with George Roden, David Koresh had to go and go to trial. He had to go to a courtroom. He had to sit in a courtroom and be in a controlled situation where there's somebody else up in the bench, the judge, controlling everything and telling, okay, now talk, now don't talk. And David Koresh was the kind of person that when he started talking, he would go.
Right.
And talk, and I'm not kidding, like hours. For him to sit, I got to interject another funny story.
Yeah.
We were going through the fruit inspection stop into California one time. And there's a person that sits there and asks people the same question every day, all day long. Hey, do you have any fruits?
Yep.
And his answer to that question was not a yes or no. It was, hey, we're vegetarians. And he wanted to go on to this whole thing. And the woman's like, I didn't, she's trying to shut him down. Okay. So anyway, he likes to talk. He made a comment one time. I can never go through a humiliating situation like that again and be in a trial.
Right.
It was one of the most psychologically excruciating things he ever had to go through.
Right.
To have some other person telling him when he could talk, when he couldn't, when he's asked a question, Mr. Koresh, what did you intend to do that day with the guns on Mount Carmel when you attacked George Roden? Well, you see, I believe in the Bible and the 7 seals. I didn't ask you that, sir. I asked you, and he's having to enormously frustrating for him.
I get that.
So
yeah,
my theory, and I think it makes sense, is that for him to be sitting there thinking, boy, if I let them take me into custody, then I'm going to have to go do that again.
Yep.
I don't want to. I want to stay free.
In control. I want to stay in control.
I want to stay in control, because that was his whole world.
That's right.
And the entire world that he created there was carefully crafted bubble for him to satisfy his. And L. Ron Hubbard is a perfect example. Carefully crafted world for your own self-fulfillment. You got it.
Nailed it. Nailed it right there. That actually kind of closes the circle for me. Now I get it. Now that makes sense to me. Wow. What a guy. What an effect he had on us, on this group of people, and ended up having an effect on the entire world as a result of his, madness, really. I mean, there really isn't any other. There's a lot of words for it, I suppose, but that's a nice reductionist one.
It's it's a psychological thing. It's a thing that he just gets into, and it's like a feedback loop where you're never quite you can't get enough, right?
That's
you're
right.
always, I need more stuff, more reverence, more admiration, more,
Exactly.
In fact, he would describe himself going into darkness many times, which I think for him meant what we would call depression.
Yes. Yeah.
Because he talked about, I went through an enormous period of darkness.
Right.
Because he would get depressed because, he needed and then he would always get new light. Oh, new light. Yay.
That's right. Yeah. Just another point to mention of the FBI, screw up on this was when they did have adults come out of the compound, and they were getting people out of there before everything went to hell. They immediately arrested them and put them in orange jumpsuits and put them in prison, right? And so
that was the guys with the guns, the FBI. They're like gonna really,
and so
bad idea.
And all of this is being televised, all of it, right? I mean, the world is like enraptured by this, and there's like something on the order of 1,000 or 2,000 some odd media personnel on around the area. It was insane. It was a circus, and
yes.
And with all of this being broadcast, I mean, it was so, I to this day, I am still dumbfounded by some of the moves these guys made, because, such a thing fed perfectly, not only into taking any hope out of those members who were in there that they could get out and have a life, but it feeds his narrative.
You see what the enemies of God are doing to us?
That's right. Yeah. That's right. All feeds into it, right? And none of them saw that. None of them. They were just clueless of what they were dealing with. And that's why I say they were in over their head. One could hope that nowadays it might be a little different, but frankly, I don't have such hopes. I know that they have different protocols now in terms of dealing with hostage situations, and there's a little bit more understanding and communication if you get the right guys, but it's a bit of a coin toss for me as to what's going to show up on scene. Right. These days, and these government organizations these are people who feel very empowered to do a lot of things that they should not feel empowered to do. Yeah. So anyway, we still have a lot of lessons to learn from all of this. And there's no question that something like this will happen again. Hopefully not with such tragic results, but I'm saying this kind of barricade confrontation situation,
I would say in the current political climate, eventually
it's begging for it. It's begging for it on either side, ideologically. By the way,
exactly. It could come anywhere direction. Sure,
that's right, left or right now. All right. Well, listen, I really want to thank you for taking the time to be on my show for an hour and a half here and break all this down out of your life and out of your experiences and your learning on this. Now, you have your own YouTube channel where you go into great detail about some of this stuff, yeah?
I have. I've started a new YouTube channel on February 28th. That was the day of the ATF raid. Mm-hmm. And I have 10 videos up now, I think. I put one out about every week. And it's called Branch Davidian History.
There we go.
And so it's about trying to tell the story in detail. And I'm telling stories from my own experience. I'm telling stories, other stories that I know about. I'm telling stories about the theology. I'm going into more detail about some of the things we talked about. in terms of George Roden and what his role was, and
Excellent.
things like that. Yeah.
Excellent. Excellent. Well, I highly recommend, if anybody has had their curiosity piqued by this show, because we've really only put our toe in the lake that is the knowledge to be known about this incident. There's a tremendous amount to know about all this, but I think we've certainly covered a lot of the highlights here, and I want to recommend your channel to people, so I'll put a link to that in the show notes here below on the video.
Thank you very much.
Absolutely.
I appreciate that. Yeah.
Yeah, you bet. And I wish you the best of luck in your future endeavors with this, because it's important work. We gotta, you, me, the people who do this work, y'all out there, this isn't just a true crime podcast. This has real world consequences. And the more we understand people like David Koresh and the people who follow people like David Koresh, the more we can be prepared to deal with them when disaster strikes, but also the fewer people we will succumb to or fall for that level of extreme nonsense. And that's my mission in all of this. And I it's not just about eating popcorn and watching horrible things happen, and I hope people
Absolutely.
walk away from this with that understanding. So again, thank you very much for joining me today.
You're welcome.
All right, folks, if you have not subscribed, of course you need to do so. And if you have not shared this video, of course you need to do so. So get it out there. And I will see you guys next week. Bye-bye.